Welcome to the Old Code New Tricks podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome a special guest who has significantly impacted the world of consulting and freelancing, Jonathan Stark. Jonathan has started his career much differently than the world he is in today. He is a Berkeley grad and was a guitarist of the Boston-based rock band The Balls. The then musician turned to an old hobby of software development for his next career move, which proved well for him as he became an expert in mobile software development during the smartphone boom around 2007. This expertise allowed him to become a consultant in mobile strategy for large corporations and led him to publish his first books, Building iPhone Apps in 2010 and Building Android Apps in 2012. The consulting experience led him to become a leading voice for the fight against hourly billing, known as the ditching hourly guy. Jonathan helps freelancers, consultants, and agencies break from the trap of trading time for money by embracing value-based pricing, including our agency as well. He's the author of the books Hourly Billing is Nuts, Learn Your Lines, and Pigeonhole Yourselves as some of our favorites, where he helps people better clarify the value they provide and how to turn that into more revenue and better client relationship. Through his coaching, courses, and popular Ditching Hourly podcast, Jonathan guides countless professionals in transforming their business by pricing based on the outcomes and the value they deliver rather than the hours they spend. So Jonathan's insight has been featured in publications like Forbes. In the future, he's been a big inspiration to Adam and I and a reason that we have a profitable, growing company. So his mission is simple but powerful: to help independent professionals and agencies create profitable, sustainable businesses that align their incentives with their clients' success. So welcome to the podcast, Jonathan.
Wow, thanks for that. That was probably the best intro I've ever gotten. Very nice.
A huge compliment. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'd love to start off.
Good talking to you.
Yeah, that was awesome. Great. We'll see you guys next time.
Okay, bye.
Well, I got to start off the podcast asking kind of the burning question that you've seemed to not answer quite yet. Do you or do you not at all are related to someone named Tony? And if so, can we get access to the suit?
That would be great, wouldn't it? That would be fun.
Awesome.
How many jokes do you get that? Do you get that like daily, joke a lot?
Daily. And
okay.
It's anytime you go to a store and they ask for your name for the rewards or whatever, it's like it's either that or Game of Thrones.
Yes, I could see that.
Winter is coming.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's kind of funny. I feel a little bit with where we live in Middle Tennessee, tons of country music stars everywhere. I've stood beside Keith Urban, and I think I was less starstruck than I am right now. It's you talk about a lot in your newsletter, kind of like building that relationship. Like when you're reading somebody's thoughts every day and you've read their books and stuff like that, listen to the podcast, you really do kind of develop a sense that like, somebody and they don't even know you exist. So it's kind of interesting experiencing that, experiencing like meeting somebody whose thoughts I've been reading about value-based pricing and stuff like that. And then it's like, wow, he's here, he's here. So yeah, it's really, really cool. Where do we want to start, Jake?
Yeah.
Well, just for context, for anyone watching, again, what we really try to provide here is for anyone who's non-technical, trying to make software decisions within their business, whether that be solving a bottleneck in their business through software or launching a revenue generating product. We really try to focus on first principles to where you can know what's BS and what's not, and have, make better informed decisions. Jonathan has done a really good job on the, kind of opposite spectrum with, software consultants and considering that he's had some of that of his background himself. I'd be really curious to know, since he's had it come from it more on the values-based pricing as someone who is a consultant or creative or freelancer, how can we flip the script now when we're focusing on you're looking for a freelancer yourself or someone to help you in a specific way? How do we then focus on articulating value? Since it seems like in a lot of the conversations we have, that's a big, oh shit moment. Like, yeah. I didn't think about that. And then we really have to get into, well, is this a $50,000 problem? Is this a $100,000 problem? And that's where we oftentimes have to start.
Right. So if you had sort of a non-technical founder and they wanted to have someone develop like a SaaS for them or something, like what would I recommend to that person? And basically it's the same thing that I would say to them if they were considering hiring me for something. Like back in the day, I did things like that. I was still in the in a code editor daily, or in the early iPhone days, and I couldn't go to a barbecue without five people being like, "Oh, I've got an idea for an app," like,
Right.
it was the joke at the time was like, "Oh, we want to build a Facebook clone. It's gonna be like Facebook, but whatever."
Yeah.
And and I've got $5,000. So can you make me a Facebook clone this weekend? So the thing that I kind of like talk them out of the tree, like, because it's fun to talk to non-technical founders. They see a gap in the market. They're excited about it. They want to get started, but they don't have funding or anything. They usually don't have a ton of money. Maybe they're sort of a successful executive type and they can bootstrap, with some savings or something, or maybe they've got an angel investor. But the budgets usually aren't huge at this stage. If the budget was huge, then this conversation is not for you. It's a totally different conversation.
Right.
But if you're looking to sort of have this bootstrapped type of app or small app for your or SaaS, create a SaaS business on the side, you're probably going to want to start with, or at least this is the way I would insist to work with someone. If they didn't want to work like this, I wouldn't work with them. Is a kind of an iterative process of proving using small stable releases of one kind or another, proving that there is some kind of demand for this thing in the first place, and making bigger bets and bigger bets and bigger bets. If somebody came to me and they're like, "No, we can't do that. We're afraid someone's going to steal our idea and it needs to come to market fully formed like this all singing, all dancing app," I'm like, not going to work with a person like that. Not that it doesn't work, but I just don't want to set myself up for that kind of huge risk.
Sure.
I don't want a front row seat to them losing $1 million. And
Absolutely.
I've seen it happen plenty of times.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm a little jaded, but especially with non-technical people, I'm like, look, you might see a real gap in the market. There might be a demand. You might be a salesperson for IBM or something, and you're constantly in contact with people who are like, "I just wish it did this," or is there anything out there that does this thing? And you actually know there's a line of people that would write you checks to have your parking lot drone mapping software, something like that. Then okay, great. But let's actually, my advice to them in person and right now would be, how could you test the demand? How could you prove that there's some demand there? And what would be a quick way to test that, and then prove to me and yourself that it would make sense to put a little bit more money into this, a little bit more money into this. And if you're doing that and you've got evidence of some kind of market demand, then so much the better. You can get partners, you can get investors with just that proof that would allow you to like get more capital, invest more in the thing. They usually don't want to hear this because that's not as much fun as jumping into, having someone start coding and then being able to play with the interface and then show the interface to people. And they're really excited about it, but I've seen time and time again when this happens, they show the app to someone, they're like, "Look, isn't this cool?" And the person's like, "What does it do?" It's like, "Look, you can swipe up and down, and if you click on this, the map comes up." And it's like, what is this for? Like, it's so obvious to the founder. The interface is, generally speaking, the app, whatever it is, whether it's a mobile app or like a desktop type of thing, it's not obvious to anybody else, and you wouldn't want to invest $500,000 to $1 million to find out that no one gets it, no one cares, no one's going to buy it, no one's going to subscribe to it.
Yeah.
So it's a real party pooper kind of thing to do, where I would say, what could we do to convince me that this is going to work, that this is going to be meaningful? And then I would get into a conversation with them around what's the business case? Who are the buyers? What do the buyers want? Why can't they do this? Why can't they do that? Why can't they do something else? Until I'm convinced that it's worth a test. And then the test, there's probably one or two or maybe three levels of tests that I would do that don't even involve coding. It would start out with outreach, perhaps, to potential clients. Could you even make a list of people who might be interested in this?
Right.
And then I would say something like, well, what if you tested the market demand with some kind of no-code solution, a tiny proof of concept that does a fraction of what the ultimate thing is going to do, or the SaaS, maybe it solves a particular kind of problem, put together a webinar where you talk about solving that problem without software and see if anyone shows up. Or another thing to do, maybe use the sprint approach that Jake Knapp and is it Jake Knapp? I think so. They wrote that sprint book about creating the interface that you want in like Keynote or a PDF, and actually putting it in front of someone and saying like, do you understand this? Does this make sense? And then at the end of it, if they're like, when is this going to be ready? I want this. Then, okay, now to me, I'm like, all right, this makes sense. Then basically I would try and talk them out of doing it is what it really boils down to. Yeah. It's like, prove to me that this actually makes sense, because it's going to be expensive and it's super risky.
Yeah, do you almost develop a gut sense? Like somebody starts explaining something to you and you get this sense in your gut that you're like, okay, now it's my job to essentially stomp all over this
break
dream.
The news.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. If they're not talking about customers immediately, I'm like, dude, if they're just talking about features and how great it's going to be and how excited they are, then I'm going to poop on that party. It's like, I've seen it too many times.
It feels like probably 80% of the people that we talk to, that is how it goes. It starts with, here's the idea, here's why it's amazing, here's why it's the next, Instagram. And we're like, cool, awesome, great. How can we cut 99% of the scope and deliver a proof of concept in 2 weeks? And sometimes they're like, okay, yes, we're on board for this. And yes, we still want to deliver an MVP, but sometimes the MVP is still beefy enough that we're like, can we piecemeal even the MVP somehow? And so, for example, recently we've had this idea, and we haven't actually iterated on this idea yet, but almost this idea of like, okay, so you've got this idea for this MVP. Let's make our first phase deliverable. The first thing that we actually try to build out and then we give to you is essentially a database schema. It's essentially, we're going to model out, this is how the business is going to work. These are all the things that it needs to do. Let's just put a database schema together that says, okay, if we look at this, does this do everything that we think it needs to be able to do to accomplish your end goal and to accomplish the MVP goal? And that's a deliverable in and of itself, I think, because then it's like, okay, if you decide that, wow, that was way more expensive than I thought it was going to be, or maybe I want to pump the brakes or whatever, you still have that database schema. You can go take that to somebody else. You can shop around if you want to, but it's still a valuable thing that you've been given that kind of starts you down that path. What are your thoughts on like an approach like that?
That's exactly how I used to do it in my meetings with new clients when I was doing FileMaker stuff, billing by the hour, because I knew that was a really good way. Talking about the business objects was a really good way to uncover scope and complexity. And I don't do it anymore. I stopped doing it. I'm more focused, or when I was still coding, or even now, if someone convinced me to like be a co-founder or something.
Right.
So many times I have found that that initial, like if you start with a database schema, or if you start with an API, so many times I've found out that once you start working on the interface, the database schema or the API is wrong. So I would always start with the interface, assuming it had an interface. Like let's say somebody's not hiring you to build an API, that's different. But if it's going to be a SaaS, I would start with the interface every time, because that's the only thing they're going to have an opinion about. They're not going to have an opinion about the API. They're not going to understand. They're like, oh, I guess this schema makes sense. But it would always, the classic question was like, I'd be asking questions like, would there ever be 2 clients on an invoice? And they would always say, no, it's always 1 client on an invoice. Or could more than 1 person own the forklift? No, only 1 person can own the forklift at a time. And invariably, they'd be like, well, once we get to the interface, because that's the thing that a normal person can understand. So for non-technical people, you can start there. It certainly works. And I agree with your assessment that it's portable and there's a certain value to it.
Sure.
But eventually there's going to be an interface. And if you just start with the interface, then that is what I would do now. I wouldn't even start. I used to be super duper API first type of person.
Yeah.
Especially when mobile was, responsive design and everything was coming out. It was like, look, because it was tough to start with the interface, because what's it really going to look like? It's going to look different on the phone. It's going to look different on the desktop.
Yep.
So starting with the interface is actually pretty hard, but that's still what I would do. It's less, to me, that seems like the least risky thing to do. And the cool part about it is you can do it with no code or not a lot of code.
Right. Or even
So
just like a Figma or something like that.
Yeah, there's a ton of sort of clickable prototype things that would allow you to iterate very quickly. Heck, you could use FileMaker. I mean, just to map out the interface.
Right.
But you can certainly do Keynote, mock up the data. You could use something like Mirage if you're doing front-end stuff with like React or something. Mirage allows the front-end developer to just stub out the API calls that it needs, and then it defines the API that the interface needs. So then you could just say to a backend developer, look, these are the exact calls I'm going to make. So make that happen. And there's no database or anything. It's all on the front end. So there are plenty of ways to do it. And it's a little bit more fun for that non-technical founder because they get to click around. They get to show it to people. They can understand if it's making them feel the way they thought it was going to make them feel. Gives them something to test, to prove, to see if other people get it. So I would start with the UI.
That is... I love how that came together because you hit the nail on the head. The reason I came up with the database schema idea is because one of the clients that we worked with are actually very technical. They have an existing SaaS product. And one of the things that I was doing is essentially helping them build an addition to that SaaS product. So we already knew what it looked like. We already knew what the clients need it to do. We understand all of that. So when we talk about extracting some common functionality, it makes a ton of sense to start with the database schema there because they're also technical, and we can talk about the business logic and all of that stuff. But it makes so much sense. As soon as you said it, I was like, duh, that makes sense. Start with what they can see, start with what they can understand. Because even, in the last podcast episode, Jake and I were talking about, when you build a house, it's very easy to see that the door's on backwards. You wanted it to swing in and it's swinging out. It's like, I can see that. I can understand that. Maybe I don't know how to fix it, but I can see it and I can flag that for my general contractor. Software is not like that. You either know how to write the software or you don't. It's binary. And then if you can't see it and you can't kind of, reason about it in your head, it's very hard to, like you said, discuss scope and discuss complexity and value and all those things. So that makes total sense to me that you would start with an interface deliverable.
Something you just said just made me think. I almost never would discuss scope anymore. I would think more. I think more around with a non-technical buyer. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking to a technical buyer, it might be a different story.
Sure.
But if you're talking to a non-technical buyer, or this is just advice for a non-technical buyer who's looking to hire someone. So the first thing I would say is like, I'm glad you're excited about this, but calm down. This is a great way to flush $1 million down the toilet. So if you can think of a phased kind of thing, so like, and just think about not your ultimate goal of being a billionaire, but your near-term goal. What is the next thing you want to do? Is the next thing you would want to do to maybe have something that you could put in front of 5 to 10 potential buyers just to get their feedback on? Or is the next thing you want to do to shop this around to a few angel investors and see if you can get $500,000? What is the next thing you want to do that if it doesn't happen, you're going to quit? Or you're just going to be like, this doesn't make sense? Or pivot or something, but you're just like, okay, what is the next thing you want to do? And let's just say they listen to this and they know the next thing they want to do is have somebody mock up an interface with no code in Keynote or PowerPoint or something, and then do a 1 week sprint to see if anybody cares, if anybody would be interested in pulling out their wallet for this thing that doesn't even exist yet.
Right.
And then I would say, okay, so for that thing, not the ultimate thing, but for that next step, being able to run a design sprint that you test with real prospects, what would that be worth to you as the non-technical founder? Maybe that's worth $1,000 to you. Maybe that's worth $10,000 to you. And then I would go out, whatever that number is, let's say it's $5,000. You go out looking for someone and say, hey, I've got $5,000 and my goal is to have this in front of 5 potential buyers on Friday, next Friday, let's say a week, right? Or like within a week of hiring you.
Right.
So I got $5,000. I'll give you $5,000 and a week to get something together. And then I'm going to have five, and I will worry about getting 5 buyers in the room on Friday. And, I don't care how many hours it's going to take. None of that stuff. Don't care about that stuff. Right. You're not trying to get a deal here. You're not shopping for the lowest common denominator and saving money. It's like, just focus on the next thing that you want to have happen. It's an experiment. Like we want to run an experiment. It's worth $5,000 to me to find out that nobody cares or that people are dying to write me checks. That's worth $5,000, right? So, okay. So who can do this for me for $5,000? Somebody raises their hand. And it's not about hours. It's not about their rate. It's like, yeah, I'll do that for $5,000. And then keep doing that as the things get bigger. So like, decide what your next goal is that you think will lead to the ultimate goal of being rich and famous, and say, okay, what's it worth to me to test this next step to get to this milestone, and say, all right, it's worth X. It's worth X. And then find someone who's willing to do it for X. And, come hell or high water, even if you take the deadline out of it, before I was saying like a week deadline, let's just say, I want you to create me a clickable interface that's going to look and feel more or less like an app, not beautiful, but it's understandable to a person. And I'm going to test it with 5 people and find out if they get it or they don't get it. And you can take as long as you want to do that. I'm in no rush. This is a side hustle, but I'll give you $5,000 to do it. People can say yes or no to that. And that's the kind of client I always wished I got. They never do that on their own, though. You have to walk them through that process. That's the why conversation. But they could.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing to why we actually started our business, because my background has been leading growth of startups. Adam's has been building the products and software related to startups as well. And so I just saw that there's just such a unique gap in a siloing between growth and sales and actual product and development. And so when we meet with somebody who is really excited, we mentioned something really similar where it's like, okay, you want software as a service. Let's do service as a service.
Yeah.
Like let's focus on
the concept.
Yeah. Let's focus on I focus on validation over product every time. Can you take this thing that you have as an idea into code and just be the butler, be the thing that implements that? Yep. And if you have the validation through actually implementing the service in some janky way, then guess what? I can guarantee that on the back end, this is going to relate really easily into creating the software. And by the way, this also tells us the roadmap, because then you start to hit all these roadblocks and you go, ooh, I just wish I could do this, or ooh, I wish that we could do that. And then just through a level of experience as a non-technical founder, the roadmap opens up, the validation opens up, and the clarity becomes much more obvious.
Yeah, I worked with a bootstrap startup founder, I don't know, many years ago, who did this sort of mechanical Turk kind of thing where I don't know exactly, I'm going to guess at this, it's been so long, but he basically created like a landing page, probably like lead pages or something, and it was for photographers to get a mobile app, air quotes. And really it was a responsive website that they could install on the home screen. So it was like, okay, photographers, like mobile app. So he was not technical, but he was technical, but he was, I guess, foolhardy enough or excited enough about mobile that he just figured it out. He Googled around. Stack Overflow was big back then. And he figured out how to make a home screen installable web app on an iPhone. I don't even think Android was a thing yet. And so it was awesome. And he sold a ton of them. And then he was making these things around the clock manually, hand by hand. They would send him they would upload photos, and he'd be like, like making these things like a maniac. And so, so then a software person comes along and the product writes itself. It's like, here's obviously what we have to do. Like, here's the finished product that he made by hand. Just do that, but make it so that he doesn't have to do it by hand. Right. So it's almost like, I like that service as a service, and then you like automate it with software, and it becomes software as a service. That, to me, that is absolute 100%. I do that now with my business.
Yeah.
Before I create a course and record all these videos and then launch to crickets, I'll say like, well, would anybody be interested in a webinar on the course I'm thinking about making? If no one is, then I'm not going to make the course. But if a ton of people are, not only am I going to make the course, but having that interaction, the direct interaction with people who would eventually be anonymous buyers, I can make the course better because I get all of their questions in real time, and then I can put that into improve the material, and then record videos, and then it's guaranteed to sell. 100% guaranteed to sell.
Yeah. It's almost like you need to slow down. You need to be a little bit more manual before you try to automate, because automating too soon is it's a blunder. It's an unforced
it's an
error
anti-pattern. Yeah.
So then when you're validating that, or maybe you're guiding someone who's non-technical and validating an idea, Jonathan, is it you that coined the term passing the mom test?
No, that's from a book, The Mom Test.
Okay. But
Yep.
I mean, that's also another trap though that you can get into, where you build something, an interface, and everyone goes, oh, this is amazing. This is awesome.
Yes.
And then you launch and it's like, no one handed you any money. How can
Right.
you distinguish when you're in that path? Let's say you're doing service as a service, or you're launching an interface to kind of validate the real difference between noise or revenue.
Right. So that book is absolutely fabulous. I think everybody who is thinking about doing something like this should read that book. It's by Rob Fitzpatrick. It's genius. And there are three, like everyone, because everyone's going to be, no one wants to like rain on your parade and say like, oh, go for it. I'm sure somebody's going to want this. Not me, but I'm sure somebody will. And he's got there's three ways to tell if someone is just being nice but lying to your face, or actually interested. And they're only going to be the key test. There's three tests. If they are willing to spend more time with you, like, we need to have another phone call about this. I'm going to bring my COO. I want you to do this presentation for them. So they're like willing to invest time. They're not to the money stage yet, but if they're willing to invest more time to find out more, that's a good sign. That's a real signal. That's not noise. The other thing is if they are willing to give you money, like, I will pre-order this right now. I want you to keep doing this. I really want this thing. That one's obvious. And the last one is reputation, which is interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that, but it's totally true. Where they say, I am not interested in this, but I know someone who is, and I'm going to put my reputation on the line by introducing you to and suggesting that he or she talk with you about this, because I'm pretty sure they're going to want it. So if they invest time, money, or reputation in your idea, that's a real sign. But if they just say, great job, let me know how it goes, that's your mom saying, good job, honey, that sounds great,
Yeah, I think in the book they half of that I think is conditioning yourself to ask correctly. Because if I ask you, hey Jonathan, do you like my website? You're probably not gonna be like, no, dude, this is trash. You're probably gonna be like, yeah, it's got these good colors. You're gonna find something that you like about it. But if I say, hey, is this how you would have designed this? Or hey, pretend that you are X using this. Versus some other thing. It's all about how you phrase that question. Because if you just ask somebody, hey, will you give me a pat on the back, or will you just absolutely like crush my hopes and dreams? They're going to pat you on the back.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think a great question is, this might be from the book, or it might just be from my experience, is just like, do you know anybody who would need this? And if it's a nice, because if they might be one of the people, right? So they go, oh, I need this.
Right.
Or they'll be like, yes, they have a Rolodex moment. Alice and Bob, I think, need this. They're exactly who would need this. And they understand the value proposition, and they're willing. They're either, so it'll either be them saying, yes, I'll give you my time to give me a full demo, or I'll be a beta and I'll test it. Or they'll pay up front. They'll invest in it. Like, they'll give you some kind of money. Or they'll introduce you to someone, Alice and Bob, they should definitely see this. And if you look at your own behavior, you see yourself doing this all the time with like a new book that you're listening to that you really like, or reading that you really like that you recommend to people. Like, that is you putting your reputation on the line, that, hey, if you read starter villain, you're going to be glad I told you about it. And it's like, if you do a demo with, whatever Ken of this new Hooli app, you're going to be glad you did. It's the same thing. Like, you're not going to run around recommending that people waste their time, right? So it's a really good signal.
Yeah, when I say, I've literally never signed up for a newsletter, but there's this newsletter called Ditching Hourly that you should read every single day. People are like, oh, interesting,
Actually, that's how I found out about you, Jonathan, was
Yeah.
Adam would not shut up about it.
I wouldn't stop talking about it.
Kept talking about this Jonathan Stark guy, and I was like, fine, I'll subscribe to his newsletter.
All
And
right,
then
where do I send the check?
down
Yeah.
down the rabbit hole. So he's like your greatest affiliate.
Yeah, I was
Cool.
gonna say I've definitely
Nice.
there's a few family members too that are probably sick of me talking about Jonathan Stark, but they've already also gotten a lot of value out of it. So
How much is that value worth, though, is the question.
Not much. Try and sell a subscription to a mailing list. Not much.
that's fair. That's fair.
All right. Well, Adam, were you about to go down the path? I had something I wanted to
No,
to
go for
bring
it.
up, if not. So then let's take it to the next step. Whether it's you're a business owner that like has an idea that you want to build, or you just need to hire somebody, a freelancer, to do something for you. For example, we've had a client that that's a long-term client of ours now, where they were building an API that they're getting quotes between $6,000 and $250,000 for an API. And then Adam worked with them, and he's like, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we building this to begin with? And they're like, I don't know, actually. I didn't really think about that.
Yeah.
And so
And
I guess,
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, in case they listen to this, they had a hunch that it may have been extraneous, and I kind of came in and just helped them confirm that, like, hey, based on your business criteria, here's what I'm thinking of, here's the trade-offs, and it doesn't sound to me like you have to have this. So they were like, that confirms my hunch. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, because this was a weird case of a very technical, non-technical founder.
Yep.
But I mentioned that example not to the point of him of his information, of blasting out his information, but more of that. Oftentimes, you get into a conversation with an agency or different freelancers, and especially with software, the variance in regards to how big the range can be is massive.
Yeah.
And so I think a big thing that makes non-technical founders really nervous going into these conversations, where we hear, we talk to business owners, we're like, I've been needing to find a software developer to help me with this problem for 4 years. I go on Google, I search things, I look at technical jargon that I don't understand, and I get the cold sweats and then push it off for another 3 months. And I think that's a big part of it. So
It is.
all that to say, how can you best define as a non-technical founder, what does good look like? Like, what does reasonable actually look like, especially considering the value of the problem that I have?
Right. You can't tell, right? Because if you're not an expert, you can't tell. Like, if I wanted to hire a cobbler or a financial advisor, that's not my world. That's why I'm hiring you. So you just can't tell. So what do you do? Because that opens you up to a lot of risk. So what do? You take the smallest risk you can, which is what I was talking about before. So and the other thing that's not even obvious from those ranges is that those are probably estimates. They're not even quotes.
Right.
So the low one's probably going to be way higher because they're lowballing, and they'll just be like, oh, geez, I didn't realize it was going to be so complicated. Your business, like, you told me the wrong thing when we first met. I didn't, you said there was only ever going to be one owner of a forklift, but now I have to change the whole schema because over time, multiple people own the forklift. It's like, oh my God, you're supposed to be the expert and you can't give me a price. So it's like, I would say, as the non-technical founder, you're not going to be able to tell. So first, recommendations would be great, getting word of mouth and saying, like, this person will not screw you, that kind of thing, of course. But if you're Googling around and getting the cold sweats, that's I think the more common situation. But if you come to someone and you're like, you're not talking about the technology or the minutia of the scope, because you can't. Don't bother educating yourself on that. Should it be React or Angular? Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Just be like, the next test I want to run is going to look like this, and it's worth $5,000 to me to run that test. And then you can let whoever you find who's willing to take that step with you, they'll decide on like whether it's Angular or React or Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever. But you do the one thing that you would want to do, one thing that would, if I were interviewing someone now, the thing that I would look for is a lack of dogma. Like, first of all, them insisting that, like, throwing jargon at you and trying to, like, no, get out of here. What you want is someone who understands, they think like a business owner. You want someone who thinks like a business owner to a certain extent. They don't need to be, like the question I always used to say to somebody, like if I had a client who knew enough to be dangerous, but really didn't know what they were doing in terms of software development, they knew some terms, but they didn't really understand the trade-offs of different things. And they'd be like, hey, could you do this? And I'd be like, yeah, I can, but what's the business case? And you want someone that wants to be on your side in hitting the home run. So like, you got to tell me where the wall is so I know where to aim.
Right.
So anybody that asks you questions about what would a home run look like, or basically what does a success or a failure look like in this next step? So make small steps, create a budget for that's worth to you, and then find someone who's willing to do it for the budget and doesn't say, if they start talking about something like technical debt or scaling or anything like that, close the door. Those people are just gonna, not that those people aren't good at what they do or that it's not important to know how to handle 1 million concurrent requests every second, but that is not what you need if you're just starting out. If you're just starting out, you probably don't even need any code, as I've said previously. You just need a test. So you want someone who they would be excited about that. So like, oh my God, I'm gonna get $5,000 to make a PowerPoint presentation? Yeah. Like you want someone who's sort of improvisational. I don't know if you can detect that from talking to someone, but it's the opposite of dogma. It's the opposite of rigid. You want someone who's clever.
Yeah.
And isn't like, an evangelist for mobile first or whatever.
Somebody's kind of got that scrappy, almost entrepreneurial feel, right?
Yes,
like somebody who's
exactly.
like, I'm going to get it done for 5K.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to get it done. And we're going to know one way or another whether test 2 is upcoming, I like that. I really like that. I also like the fact that, Jake, what is the first question that you ask people in discovering calls? Isn't it, what does a home run look like? I'm pretty sure that's the exact
Don't give away the
question
secrets, okay?
Yeah, I like that. It lets us know we're on the right track here.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I've also found that there's 3 levels to this in regards to when we're on a call, kind of discovering like what is it that we're solving for. I think there's 3 really important ways to get to the bottom of it. And it's really just taking the problem from face value and getting down to the depth of, if we do this really well and asking the right questions, we should be able to extract some time or money value, or at least some emotional capacity of like, what is frustrating or what's the problem here? Because most technical founders or non-technical founders haven't articulated this to where it's like, you tell me the problem and I'm going to ask like, okay, what happens when X, Y, and Z thing occurs, right? I want to repeat it back to you, ask for you to clarify more, because I want to understand the chaos that ensues from that problem. Then the second level is, okay, well then when that chaos ensues, how does that affect you as the business owner, right? So I understand the chaos that ensues, I understand how it affects them, and then I'll ask, well, when that problem occurs, what happens to the business? So then I understand the business outcome, and just asking 3 questions from the same problem and reiterating what they're saying back to them, with just further clarifying questions. That on its own, I feel like really is allowing us to peel back. Okay, what are we actually solving for here? Where it's not about these features and things that we want, but like what's really like under the hood, the problem, what's on fire right now?
Yeah.
Is there anything else there that you would say like is really good to ask, either as a consultant or maybe flip side to the business owner, that's like, here's some really good things to keep in mind to kind of open up, what are we actually solving for here?
Right. Yeah. I mean, those are variations of great questions. The variations of questions I use, I talk about the why conversation, why this, why now, why me. And that's more of a sales thing, but it has the same outcome, which is that, the buyer a lot of times has self-prescribed a solution, and they're not the expert, so it's almost definitely the wrong solution. They might have set a budget for this solution. We think it should be, here's what we need to do, and we think it's probably going to be about $30,000. But I will always validate that sometimes it's the right solution, but almost never. Maybe 10% of the time it's the right thing to do. And there's almost always some way to solve it that's cheaper for them and more profitable for me. So, like, why do it the hard way? And it reminds me of a story about, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but someone, hourly developer, and they were asked to do a change. I think it was a FileMaker system. They're asked to do this change to the system that was really hard to do. And therefore, the developer was really excited to do it. Because I've been doing FileMaker for so long, and it's kind of boring. I know everything, but this particular problem is really interesting, and I'm going to get to use some PHP and all this stuff that I never use, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to solve this problem, and just iterating and iterating and iterating. They were spending tons of money on it, and it turned out that the feature that they were building was for one employee who didn't want to tab around the interface the same way, and it's just it would have been less money to replace that employee than they spent on the interface. So the main question is what's the business case, or why did you decide on this solution? Why not just do this? Why not just do that? Why not leave it the way it is? Really, what's the problem? And it's and just like you said, if you walk it down, eventually, guess what you're going to get to? Dollars. So it's okay, so we've determined that this is a $1,000 problem. So we're not going to bring in a $10,000 solution. We're going to be creative. What are the different things we could do to solve this $1,000 problem? Maybe it's training. Maybe it's simply training someone how to use the interface. Maybe they didn't realize keyboard shortcuts were a thing. Maybe there's some interface automation you could do on their computer. It's just one user in this case, right? So somebody who, and getting back to your question about how would you detect that this person is going to be a good person to work with, especially at this early phase, where they're creative. They get creative about different ways to solve the problem that are perhaps not their, I don't want to say comfort zone, but maybe their main thing is they're a React developer or an API developer, but they've got they're this sort of evil genius, we could just do this and that would solve your problem without spending too much money. That's a quality that I would like. That's what I would look for if I was looking for some kind of someone. It's a very early stage. We're not talking about a startup that's looking to scale and they're getting 1 million concurrent requests. Right. It's a completely different animal. But if you're just starting out and you're trying to get the ball rolling, a lot of little tests, and someone who's willing to not be dogmatic and just be super flexible and creative and goal oriented, not input oriented. I worked the hours, you owe me the money.
This kind of brings to mind the old adage that when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Yeah. And it's kind of and I notice myself doing this from time to time. I have to almost resituate myself and remind myself that code is a liability, not an asset. We're not trying to write as much code as we can. And then also B, there are solutions that we can find, right, that don't involve us running a standalone Rails server just to XYZ, whatever it is, display a PowerPoint, So it's a good reminder for myself, if nothing else.
Yeah, the hammer problem is big. The hammer problem is very big. It's FileMaker can do anything. The hammer problem was really bad in the FileMaker space. It was real bad. It's similar for other platforms too, like Notion. People are you can do anything with Notion. It's totally flexible. You can do anything. It's okay. It's not the only solution though. And
right.
Yeah, anyway.
But Google Sheets actually is the solution for everything. We can actually do everything in Google Sheets.
Yeah.
That actually is one of the things that we say next to service as a service is hey man, you can get really far as a non-technical founder with Zapier, Sheets, and a landing page. See how far you can get.
Google Forms, right.
Google Forms, Google Sheets. Yep.
Typeform. Yeah. There's so much. I mean, look, in the 90s, the late 90s, none of that stuff existed. You had to buy books in the store, and you're configuring your own Apache server. But it's not like that anymore.
Right.
Like, you can come up with, I mean, now, of course, I'm sure all of these people are like, oh, it's going to be like Uber, but with AI, or it's going to be like whatever with AI. So
I'll say we would have a profitable business if we just collected like a 10 cents tax every time we heard it's going to be X, but with AI.
But so here's the genius thing, especially for AI, much so more so than mobile, or like trying to come up with a responsive interface, you can fake it with humans. Yep. So like your idea about service as a service, it's like, okay, well, why don't you just have a team of 3 people, maybe the 3 partners, round the clock or whatever, whenever the app is up or during the demo, do the thing, right? And then it's just like, like you're basically like the founder is basically Googling in the background to give the answer back, or whatever, or using AI in the background, ChatGPT to give the answer back. But just stand on the shoulders of giants, leverage all of this. It's just like an incredible amount of code that exists now that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And stitch the thing together. It's not going to stay like that. You're going to throw that all away once you prove the concept. It's got a lot of, I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. There's a lot of cons to that approach.
Yep.
It's like, it's impossible to debug. You never know when it's working, when it's not working. You don't know where to look to fix something. It's a nightmare. Yes. It's a complete Rube Goldberg machine, baling wire and duct tape, but it will prove the concept, and you can do it for a few $1,000s, maybe less.
Yeah.
And then just see if anyone cares. That's the important thing. Like, people they think I'll build it and customers will show up like magic. And I've seen so many things launched to crickets. It's brutal.
I mean, they get so caught up in the vanity of total addressable market. It's like, cool. There's 5 million people within your TAM. Find me 2. Find me 5.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. If they're not going to sign up to a webinar that that will solve the problem that your SaaS is supposed to solve, because the SaaS solves some business problem. It's a service ultimately. Yep. So what is the problem that it's solving? If you can't get 5, exactly. Oh, there's 5 million people in your total addressable market. Get me 5. Put them in a room on Friday, or remotely in a Zoom room on Friday, and I'll put an interface in front of them that, through smoke and mirrors, we'll see if they care about. And they're like, well, where am I going to find those people? It's like, well, you said there were 5 million, like they're just sitting there.
Yeah, walk out in the street. It sounds like through that statistical probability, you'd run into them.
Statistically, one of them's living in your house right now. I mean, like,
and check out the mom test thing here, because the 5 people have to devote an afternoon or whatever it is. Like, they have to put an appointment in their calendar. Mm-hmm. If they are willing, if you pitch the idea to them and say, hey, could you come and test this thing on Friday at 1? You can do it on Zoom, or you can come in person. We just want to see you using the interface and see what you think and get your real-time feedback of like your reaction to it. Then if they're willing to do that, you could, I mean, the interface might stink. They might not like that. But if they were willing to spend an hour based on your articulation of the solution, or whatever you said to them, that's a really good sign that they're like, there is a demand, like there's some pain that they're wrestling with that they would love to find a solution for, even when that's not ready yet. So that's actually, the mom test is one thing. The sprint book is another thing. It might be great advice for non-technical founders to read those 2 books, because they're both incredible for this exact kind of person.
Yeah. And it's, compared to the amount of money that you could spend building the wrong thing, spending a week or 2 weeks of your time reading a couple of books is about the cheapest solution that you can find to make sure you're not, flushing lots of dollar bills down the drain.
And time, the opportunity cost, if somebody came to me and was like, oh, I mortgaged my house, I'd be like, I am not working with you. Like,
I really liked, how did you phrase it? You said, I don't want front row tickets to watching you flush $1 million.
Seat watching you burn your retirement account.
Yes. That's accurate. Very accurate. I'm curious. So one of the things that I think about sometimes, and And actually, you know what? Before I go down that, Jake, you had kind of started going down this path. I don't want to derail us. That if you had another like kind of follow up question.
Oh no.
Okay.
By all means.
So I'm kind of curious. The combination of value, how you present value, and then the actual pricing, and then the pricing terms itself. We have had projects that make me a little bit sick to my stomach when I present the price. And I'm like, you know, I can't believe we're asking for this. But, you know, you look at the value that, you know, we've talked with them, we've certified like, yes, it's worth this. Still feels crazy, you know, especially to a guy who's, you know, I was hourly billing earlier this year, you know, so like I'm still, it all makes sense logically. But then sometimes it's just like, man, there's no way that I'm going to get them to sign this check for this amount of money when the value, especially if it's like a big system, I'll be a little bit more specific. In this particular instance, it's an existing system. We already know what it needs to do. We already know where it's broken and where it needs to be better. And we want to rebuild it from scratch. And we've validated that it makes sense from a business case. You know, like we've validated this, but they're not going to realize that value until this system is delivered.
Right.
And so it's one of those things that's like, okay, it doesn't seem realistic to say, write me the check for this thing that's not going to, you know, be realized for 3-6 months at a minimum. And then
what did they say? Like, what's the business case?
Well, the business case is essentially giving back a full-time employee who currently is wrestling with their old system just to make sure the data is in the format that they need it, just so that they, because the old system is essentially 4 separate systems that all you have to go manually grab this thing from here and enter it over here. And you have to grab this thing. And, if you accidentally entered it in system C over here, you have to remember to go add it to system A. It's just, it's disparate. Okay. It was built over 20 years ago. So there's that. And there's also a potential increase in revenue as well, based on how we implement.
It's got to be holding them back. Like, it's not just the employee. That's got to prevent them from scaling.
It's slowing the entire business down, but they have a full-time employee who is dedicated to making sure the data gets to each part of the system that it needs to go to.
Right. So they've sneaker net.
Yeah.
You're right.
So it's one of those things that it's like, okay, we've confirmed that it's worth what we're going to charge for. And, but I can't see them, you know, if I like stick to my guns with like the fixed fee 100% up front, I can't see them saying like, yeah, to that. You know what I mean?
Okay. So it's not, so you haven't presented this yet. It's still
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Well, a rewrite it's not even a rewrite. It's a from scratch based on an existing broken system.
Yes.
So unless you are godlike in your ability to predict the scope, it's going to take you 3 times longer than you think, even if you already did the 3 times longer than you think calculation.
Right.
So whatever that number is, 'cause you're taking a huge risk.
Yeah.
So that number better be damn high.
Right.
Because if you're planning to stick to it, right, which presumably you are.
Yeah.
So it's a very risky proposition. I'm sure you're up to the task, but you're probably not a professional scope estimator. That's a different skill.
Right.
So it's probably too low, almost for sure. So the question is, how much too low? But as the expert, you're like, we're going to take that risk. We think it's going to take 6 months. In fact, I would even say to them, if it takes 18 months, is that going to cause a problem for you guys? Right. Other than the normal extension of the regular problem.
Right.
Because it could, maybe it'll take 3, maybe it'll take 6, maybe it'll take 2. But since you're not promising a number of hours, it might actually justify your price more so to them if you say, but we want to know if this takes 18 months or 2 years, is that going to create would you just say no to the whole thing? Or would you go in a different direction? Because you don't want to get to the point, even if you're not charging them more money. Let's say you think it's going to take 6 and you get up to 12 months and it's still not done because there's nothing to compare it to, because it was broken in the old system.
Right.
And there is no old system for this particular thing because the guy with the sneakers has been doing it.
Right.
So, all right. So you're basically building a new system with no real spec, some spec, but no real spec. Maybe there's business logic baked into points that you'll be able to use. Yeah. But let's say it takes longer. You don't want to get to a point where they're like, this is great that you're not continuing to charge us, even though we all thought this was going to take 6 months and you're just basically working for free as far as we're concerned.
Right.
But if we had known it was going to take this long, we would have done something else. You don't want that to happen.
Right.
Because they don't want a refund. They don't want so I would find out just in case. And if you say that, the psychology, and even if they're listening,
Right.
this is all true. This is not like some thing I'm making up.
Yeah. It's not like underhanded or anything like that.
No, right. So if you just say to them, like, look, if this ends up taking 18 months or 2 years, we'll stick to our price, but is that going to create some other problem for you other than the fact that you're just wrestling with the same issue that you've been wrestling with? Or is there some liquidity event that's going to be ruined? Like, is there some real hard deadline?
Right.
And if you say that, then what is that in their minds? They're like, wow, these guys think this might take 2 years and this is the price. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to compare it to, they will understand at a gut level, the risk that you are taking on. So you're taking on a big risk for them. It's great. So it justifies the price. I don't know what the price is, and I don't know what the real timelines are or the extent of the thing, but you could say to them, or we'll charge you $200 an hour and we're done. No way. They would much rather have a fixed price.
200. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. We have we've talked to them about scope and stuff like that. And I've explained, look, with a project this size, the accuracy, your estimate is what your estimate is, but the accuracy of that is nobody freaking knows. I could get it done in half time because I run into literally no roadblocks, or we could get into something so severe that it's like, okay, I have to, we just have to stop and examine the feasibility of the whole project. Right. Mm-hmm. We've done some due diligence. We've actually done a smaller project for them. So we've seen some of the ways some of these inner systems work.
That's
so we're not completely going in cold, but still 100% what you said, a non-trivial risk. And they have told us explicitly, like, we're putting no deadlines on you. If we didn't do this, the system's broken the way that it is now. Next year,
yeah.
So
we can keep limping along.
Right. So, but I do think that there is a certain kind of, it's different to say there's no hard deadline than it is to say, if this took 18 months, would you still proceed? If this took 2 years, would you still proceed? I think that's a different question, and I really like that. So
cool. I think it'll help you if you do that. I think it'll justify a higher fee. Yeah,
because we've struggled with the fact that if you got a project that your estimate is 1 month, then you have a pretty firm understanding of the scope and pretty firm understanding of what all's involved. When your minimum estimate is 6 months, that is an indication of the fact that this is a very, very large project. And one of the things that we've kind of gone back and forth with is like, is there any way that we can essentially build the two systems side by side so that the databases are writing data back and forth? And the long and short of that is no. The database is so old, there's no such thing as change data capture or anything like that. So
well, let me put an idea in your head. This is a very specific. It doesn't always work. It doesn't even often work. But in some situations, especially when the data is very time sensitive, I have done this sort of thing where you run the two systems in parallel and there's no cutover, no data cutover. Because if you try and map the old system to the new system, that's brutal. It's like that's a whole project unto itself.
Yeah.
But if you have the old people know how to limp along, keep limping along, and then the cutover is, as of this date, you've done all your testing, everyone knows how to use it, they're trained on the new system. As of this date, the old system becomes read-only, and the new system is where you put all the new stuff. And if it's the kind of business where the old data kind of doesn't matter just for reporting and stuff like that, but they're not accessing it to go back and rewrite it, then all the new stuff, then there's like a 2-week period, at least in my case. This happened more than once to me, where option 3, it wasn't running in parallel. Option 3 included me doing a data migration after the new thing which a whole nother project unto itself is doing the data migration. And guess what they say? Nah, we'll just tell the employees to run both in parallel, and then eventually we'll be out of the old one, and the new one will have the important data, and and it becomes option 2 is systems in parallel, no data cut over. And then option 3, a data cut over in a situation like this, terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, we probably would have actually gotten around to this project months ago, except for the fact that I've spent weeks literally like just weighing the pros and cons. What does it look like to migrate this data? What's the worst case scenario? Do we have backups? Spoiler alert, we did not have backups. We do now. But it's just, there was a plethora of those things going through my mind where it's just like, man, like a data migration. And it is one of those companies where it's a membership based organization. So it's like that data's gold. Like if that data's gone, their company's gone, so it's one of those things that like failing that data migration is just not an option. But I love the idea of actually like presenting those options, saying like, hey, here's the trade-offs. If we try to do this data migration, here's what it would net you, but here's what it would potentially cost as far as time and money go, and let them make the decision. Like, actually we can, continue to limp along and then switch to read only. I like that a lot.
Yep. Yeah. If you were going to do, not to get into advice here, but like,
I like it.
When I've seen this done well, there's the migrate. Like, of course, when you release new software, you're going to have people QA, you're going to have it tested. They're going to see like, oh, is it working right? It's the same with data migration. There can be bugs in it that you don't catch right away. Like all the leading zeros were stripped off all of the zip codes or something, or this was a text field, but it turned into an integer and now all the names are numbers. So, and you don't notice it right away, especially when it's you, because it's not your data. So you wouldn't know if it was wrong. You're just like, oh, it looks like a phone number. So, I know a guy, maybe if you want an introduction, I can do that. But like, I know a guy who just does data migrations, or he used to. And his process, which is the process, a similar process to what I've used, because FileMaker has this problem big time because the data is not separate from the database. The approach is figure out a way to automate the migration for the old system to the new system, have the people test the new system. It's not like okay, this is the cutover and forevermore the whatever garbage got into the new system, we'll fix it manually. It's like come up with a way that you can automate the migration, almost like an import-export thing with transformations in the middle, like a map to this thing, and then check it and have a way to roll back to a previous version. Maybe it's not the, maybe rollback is the wrong word. That's a loaded term because it's a database thing, but a way to keep running it, keep testing it until a particular person or people at the client are like, like the people, probably frontline people, can take one look at the data and know that it's wrong, because Sally doesn't live in Albuquerque. Right. So somebody like that who's totally familiar with the member data, and they sign off on like, okay, this works. And that's the day that you cut over. You're like, okay, this old system becomes read only, new system becomes the one. And and that justifies a really high third, because it's a project unto itself. So if option 3 could be really expensive, and then they're like, yeah, you know what? Nah, it's not worth the money. We'll just work in parallel and put the new stuff in. Or we'll do it. Or I've seen people be like, nah, I'll have Karen type it in. For real.
Yeah. I mean, especially if we already have an employee that literally their job is data replication across multiple of our internal systems already.
Right.
It's not an insane idea. Yeah. So 2 things. First of all, yes, would love the introduction. Second of all, love the recommendation. Because one of the kind of, just to nerd out and be technical for a moment, I did. So one of the ideas
this is for non-technical founders.
I know.
We can cut this out.
Let me have my 5 seconds of nerdy. The idea that I had was we can do CSV exports from the old database. That's literally the only way I can get data out of it. So automate a process that basically says, hey, give me the CSV export for this table. And it just runs like every night, something like that. And it overwrites as we're building the new system. It just every night, it just overwrites the data through that map transform process. And it says, hey, boom, your system's new every morning. So every morning I can say, hey, we released feature XYZ on the new system. You can go look at it. Don't put anything important in it because it's going to be overwritten every single day.
Yes.
But when they go in and then they look at it, they can say, oh, hey, well, when you map the name fields in, yeah, they're all numbers now. What's up with that? And I can say, oh, right. Okay. Yes. And I also thought almost
like
as
that.
kind of like, sorry, say it again.
I like that. That's a good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, one more time. You like what?
You liked that idea?
Shower me with
That was a
compliments.
good idea. And the other thing that I thought about kind of almost on like the more emotional side is like, well, now I can build it in parallel with the existing system. Not that there's data, parity there, but it's, you actually get to use the system. So when I say I, did this new thing and it's going to make this data process more easy for you guys, you can go use it immediately and you can see it. And there's that little like, oh, sweet, I can see the project moving along. That feels great, even though we're not actually going to be able to use it for another month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 years, whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's hard for users to test a system that has fake data in it because
Right.
it doesn't, that can mask bugs that exist like mapping, field mapping and stuff. So being able to test with their real data is probably going to deliver. Like here's a back to your question about like how do we sort of justify the value of something they're not going to get for 6 months to 2 years.
Right.
Then it becomes a progress metric, which is a very important thing to keep the scope from creeping. If you have progress metrics, you can tell that you're on track, and that when you do finally launch, it's not going to be like a well, that's not what we wanted, like a surprise.
Right.
Is to identify people in the system who hate this idea. So there's probably users who do not want to change, who are perfectly happy with the way it currently is. Maybe not, but it's been my experience that they're usually someone who, as bad as it is, it's the devil I know,
Right.
and this new thing is definitely going to be worse. So, because I'm going to have to learn my job all over again.
Yeah.
So if you can identify a few of those people up front who are looking for you to fail, they will be great bug testers because they want you to fail.
Right.
And everyone's going to know that they're like that. And if you can get them to be like, I can't wait to start using this new thing, everyone else is going to be like, oh my God, this is going to be great. Because even
so gold.
Alice likes it.
I'm
That's
writing
excellent.
that down. People who want you to fail are the best bug testers.
Yeah.
And slash
Bug testers should get paid
hype
by
men.
bugs. The more bugs you find, the more money you get. It's like bug bounties.
100%.
That's the way
Yeah.
QA should work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk about aligned incentives. It's like, I want
Yeah.
I want the software to be bug free and you want to make money. Let's find bugs.
Yeah, right.
I want to be respectful of your time, but
Yeah.
I want
Oh,
to ask
sure.
one more question if that's cool.
Yep. Yeah, let's go for it.
So when we're talking about a non-technical founder asked me some questions or some topics to consider. One of the things he asked was like, what's the pitfalls? What are some pitfalls of working with individual contractors or freelancers? Considering you empower them, we kind of talked about some things to keep in mind in the development landscape of hiring a freelancer. Mm-hmm. Let me hear your experience on like hiring freelancers. Have you had like really bad experiences and built heuristics from that, since you have a one-man business,
Right.
that's like helped you navigate those relationships later that you could pass off to a non-technical founder?
Sure.
business
Yeah.
owner?
Because the implication is that they're hourly. So assuming that they are hourly, which most of them are, then there's sort of two. I've had two kinds of experiences. One is where they're in a different cost of living type of country, and their hourly rate is so low that it doesn't matter to me if they take 2 hours or 10 hours. It's irrelevant because the thing that I want them to do is worth way more than that to me. And on the other end, you get sort of more of these premium people who want to charge you $100, $200 an hour. And then you say, okay, great, go. And then in the first week, they go 80 hours before they have a check-in. And you're like, wait a second. Like, this isn't, maybe it's my fault. There was some assumption that I made, and there's no blame necessarily. But that person went way too far down the rabbit hole with the meter running to completely waste my time and money. And so assuming that the hourly rate is non-trivial, I guess I would say, first of all, try and get them to just agree that there's $5,000 for this next test. Can you do it or not? Great. That's the main thing. But if that's not going to happen and it's hourly, then you want to know, you want to be in the loop. Like, you want to have some kind of every day or every other day, some kind of check-in. And I would probably say, My expectation is you are not going to work more than 40 hours a week on this. Between 20 and 40, something like that. So you've got a budget, or you could say, you can work as many hours as you want on this, but I'm not paying more than $1,000 per invoice per week. So do what you want, but it's a maximum of $1,000 a week. So that way you're sure you're going to get a check-in, and you can, especially at the beginning, you'd be like, oh, I forgot to tell them it all has to be in Japanese, or, there's probably something you forgot to tell them. And there's this assumption gap where it's not a knowledge gap, it's an assumption gap where you're just new to this person, they might not speak English, or that you two might not speak the same language. And it's like, there's probably assumptions you're making and assumptions they're making that can lead to you losing a ton of money for no good reason. But you don't know what they are until you start working together. But the first couple of check-ins, you're like, oh, I forgot to tell you, it needs to be mobile friendly. Like I assumed you would make everything mobile friendly, because why wouldn't you? But that was an assumption on my part, or whatever the case may be. So I would perhaps set something like a weekly maximum or something like that, and then just make sure you're getting check-ins. You don't have to do it forever, but until you understand that the two people kind of like, okay, we understand each other. You just don't want them running off and burning 80 hours in the wrong direction and then expecting to get paid for it. And just, that's not good for anybody. So maybe that's what I would say.
Love that.
Awesome. Jonathan, it's been great. Really had a good time.
Cool. Thanks. Same here.
This has been the Old Code New, oh my gosh, I blinked on the name.
What show is this?
Old Code New Tricks. Old Code New Tricks podcast. I would get stuck right there saying that every time. Thank you so much for listening. And Jonathan, where can they find you?
Just my website. You can Google the Ditching Hourly Guy, so you don't have to try and spell Jonathan. Yeah.
But you can find him on LinkedIn. I can personally say so. If you're a LinkedIn person, check him out on LinkedIn. His newsletter is great. The only newsletter I'm actually signed up for, because you get value every day.
True story.
So highly suggest that.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.